Welcome. We are Money Copilot LLC. Join us as we share our roadmap to help people along on their journey to better financial health. Your wallet will thank you. Thank you for joining us. We decided to put our latest Copilot advice on video instead of just writing an article. And in this particular case, we are going to be talking about child support. Is child support inherently unfair? Think about it. You're causing one person to pay the other person for a shared responsibility, which is their mutual children. By that definition, it can't be unfair because it took two to bring that child into the world. However, like most things in life, implementation and intention matters. Now, for the most part, each state in the U.S. has a different set of rules for child support. There is some federal law that tries to make child support somewhat uniform in certain categories, but at the end of the day, you have to consider what's different from a state-by-state basis when it comes to calculating it. But the key thing here is that if the parents can agree on how much child support should be, it's no problem. Because between that unit, whether it's a set of divorcing parents, and of course the divorce can make things challenging, or parents who have never actually been in a committed relationship, maybe it's a child from a one-night stand or whatever the case may be, if they can agree, all is good. The issue is so many of us cannot agree. And one person's idea of what is fair child support may be completely unfair for the other person when you factor in what kind of income that they have coming into their own home. Now, with that in mind, what happens when the parents don't agree, right? That's what the laws are meant to address. And what is happening, or what has been happening really over the years, is that more and more of us are finding ourselves in situations where we just cannot agree. Or one parent decides to be a bit of a deadbeat, while the other person is doing what's best for the children in terms of trying to support them. That's not fair either, right? So when parents can't agree, you end up having to get a third party involved, which is essentially the state. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you ask for it by not being able to work in a collaborative way with your other parent. Unfortunate, but I'm sticking my nose out there, or my neck out there to be able to say that. So, let's think about how is child support calculated? Because at the end of the day, even for a third party to get involved, they have to be using some sort of basis for it. If you were able to get into an agreement with your parent or with the other parent and not have a third party involved, you basically be looking at whatever your own expenses are in order to figure out how much is necessary to be able to support your child. But when the third party has to get involved, in order to not take sides, they can't necessarily listen solely to mom or solely to dad. They have to have some sort of objective data to be able to compare. That's where a lot of the child support tables come in. Now again, there's some flexibility in terms of how each state applies child support metrics and tables, but essentially they pay some independent authority to go out there and do some research and say, hey, how much do people who make this much spend on their child? If they have one child, how much they make, how much they spend on the children if they have two, if they have three. All that research is done, tabulated, and then they put together a table as to what the list of expenses, or not the list of expenses, but really the amounts of expenses are based on the couple's income. Not individual incomes, but the couple's income. And then the child support is calculated based on the combined income of the two parents, whether they're together or not. Okay? There are some deviations for that, like if somebody makes an extremely higher amount of income than the other, there are ways to kind of equal it out, because again, if the two parents were together, it would not be an issue because they would be benefiting from both parents' salary. Let's not even get started about the situation where one parent is not actually working. There's all that stuff that goes into it. But I digress. With that in mind, a key factor in how things are calculated is the legislation, right? Even though the government, state or otherwise, has paid to have other people investigate how much different parents making different incomes spend on their children to support them, it is not very sensitive to local changes, right? On the state-by-state level, it might be sensitive to local changes, but sometimes there are differences when it comes to one county versus another, one big city versus a country city, right? Some of that is not really factored in. And so when we are subject to child support that is enforced by a third party like the state, that is one of the big factors why we tend to think that it's not fair. Unfortunate, but true. Now, what is missing in the child support calculation? Because I just mentioned income and expenses on the child. And those are the two things that they really pay attention to. That includes health insurance, dental insurance, if you're having to do daycare, all those types of things, right? One big thing that's missing, I already mentioned, the variability in really cost of living from county to county or city to city, even within the same state. You can't tell me that people living in New York City, the actual city of New York, have the same types of expenses as people living in the outskirts of New York City or in Rochester or wherever else that you don't have the same type of large kind of outsized expenses as living in a huge metropolitan area like that. So that is not factored in at all. Second thing that's not factored in, debt. You typically have debt. The average American has some sort of debt, whether that's home debt, credit card debt, personal loans, whatever it is, debt is in your life. And original child support legislation was not made to factor that in. There is a bit of a moral hazard when it comes to debt, right? Because at the end of the day, if somebody decides to immediately get into debt just before a divorce happens, or if they decide to get into debt just before a child support hearing takes place, you can't let that be something that then says, okay, well, they pay less child support immediately, right? It has to be a bit of what is the norm for these people's lives, right? So with that said, I believe that one of the reasons why it wasn't included in the child support calculation, debt that is because there wasn't a lot of data about it. I mean, people were kind of just getting into getting a whole lot of debt in the first place. But in today's world, debt is pretty much a way of life. And there's so much statistical data over the years about how debt is by income level that I am willing to bet that the states could commission independent investigations to be able to pull that information together and then figure out how to apply that to child support, because it is badly needed. A lot of people who say they can't afford to pay the child support, it's because of that. Now, there is one other thing that we really can't control, and that's inflation. Prices go up, prices of diapers, right? Price of daycare, all this other stuff, they go up. We can't control that. And maybe there's a way to do a little bit of an adjustment in the same way that they do for Social Security, right? With child support. But even that, you have to be careful, because if somebody has gotten used to whatever the child support amount is for a few months, a year, or whatever, changing it abruptly doesn't help anybody. And I know that some states have actually tried to say, hey, there's a cost of living adjustment to be put in there. But these have to be things that are kind of projected so that people can plan, right? So for any state that's going to do that, I would highly suggest that. So with that said, what can we do about the missing pieces? I already said we really can't do anything about inflation. When it comes to figuring out what the difference is between different localities, counties, and cities, there's work that could be done there. But it's not going to happen unless you get involved when it's time to update legislation. And the kicker here is legislation doesn't get updated every year. It's only at certain times, and it's actually what's written into existing law, right? So that things don't go changing willy-nilly. if you want to change in how things are done with child support, you got to start keeping track of when that time for change is, be able to participate, right? And have ideas as to how you could actually fix the system and calculation of that child support. Lastly, when it comes to the debt, I already mentioned that child support doesn't really factor that in, but just about every American has it. If you're in a situation where you're having to deal with child support and you don't have the money, the best thing that you can do for yourself is aggressively work to get out of debt. If you can avoid debt, keep it manageable and under control in the first place, you're putting yourself in the best position. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have credit cards, you shouldn't have personal loans or mortgages. It does not mean that, but you do have to make sure that you're managing it so that if a situation happens where a third party has to get involved and determine an amount that you have to put over in order to support your own children, that you can afford it, and that debt is not taking such a heavy load on you that the expectation isn't handled. My hope is that in the future, there will be updated legislation that takes debt into account and other factors that have really been ignored over time. The fact that there are so many groups out there that just see child support as an evil thing when it was meant with the best of intentions to support our children means there's a big disconnect there. And we have to do what we can to help bridge the gap. Get involved. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.